Welcome. I'm Jessica Tejan, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. I want to talk a little more about the CAT tool, but first I want to ask around the CME conversations, what were some of the first benefits or the first results that you've seen in using those and how either managers or individual people responded to that new approach, that new way of having conversations?
The first two things that I think we noticed that we didn't necessarily anticipate was there's a question about connect. And really that question is around having the opportunity for the team member to talk about what they're most proud of or any accomplishments that they want to talk about over the last 3 months. What I heard from managers and leaders were what the team member was talking about and what they had planned to talk about were two different things. And it was really positive for the leader to hear what really the team member, what really hit home and meant the most to them. Because again, it allowed for that understanding of what's important, what motivates them, what drives them. Because the opportunity then is to say, okay, is there a way that we can do more of that? How do we get you more exposure to this or that? Because if that drives your passion, then we want to look to see what else we can do with that. The other piece was, and this was a little bit of a double-edged sword, of the team member getting empowered to come to this conversation with a little bit of them driving the discussion of what did they want to talk about around challenges or collaboration or what they needed from a development standpoint and what they needed from a commitment to their manager. We had a lot of team members that were excited about that opportunity to be coming to the table and being heard. There was also the flip side that we heard of that scared people tremendously of, I don't want to say anything in front of my boss.
Just telling in and of itself.
Right. And it may have to do with just an avoidance of an uncomfortable conversation, having had bad experiences, all of those neurological things that have gotten locked in. But those are probably the two biggest that I don't know that we anticipated, particularly around the passion piece and the accomplishments. And I think we still see that. I still hear managers talk about in their last CME conversation, what the team member brought as their big accomplishment wasn't either the manager had forgotten about it or didn't know about it or didn't think it was as big of a deal to them as it was.
So the flip side of the question is, what are some of the things that are still a challenge, that are still something that either leaders or individuals struggle with, or you're still trying to figure out how to do better in these CME conversations?
The biggest challenge when we first started this, so we've got a system now within our university online platform, a way to capture CME conversations and CAT conversations. But that was just over the last couple of years, did we bake that into it? So we really let managers and team members drive this and own that accountability. They didn't have anybody coming behind them, check in. Again, that was a little bit of a challenge because while we did a little bit of pulse surveying to see if they were happening, a lot of people were saying that they were happening, and that wasn't always the case. And then as we had a couple of years under our belt with CME, we really wanted to dig into the quality of the conversations, which I think is still, I don't think we'd probably say, at least from an HR perspective, that we're knocking that part out of the park. It's still a little bit of, well, I talk to my people all the time. I talk with Jessica every Monday as we start the week about our projects and stuff like that. And there's this re-education of, this needs to be a little bit different conversation than your project updates. It can be a 10-minute conversation. It could also be an hour-long conversation. It's dependent, and we're leaving you that flexibility. And it is not a project update conversation. So it is that connection. It is that relationship building that we want you to have in those. So that's been ongoing. The other disconnect in rolling out CME and just over the last few years was, oh, the manager needs to drive this, or the team member needs to drive this. It is connected to our increases. It's not connected. Some of those elements that I told you we were really honed in on trying to do differently, what people heard and what they took away from the education on it, the training, the conversations, was ever so slightly different, that we started getting mixed messages across the board. One of the big ones was, you can't talk about anything negative in a CME conversation. And I think we were like, none of us said anything about that. What we were trying to do is distinguish it between being proactive and reactive. And so if this was something that you've given feedback, you've had conversations, and something is still not getting better or getting back on track, that's when you call your HR business partner, and we're going to have a more improvement type of conversation. So being able to distinguish that your CMEs and conversations around development planning and those kind of things are a proactive way of how we want to approach performance and growth and development in our people. If something's going off the rails, that's going to come out of that CME space, and we're going to have conversations that are around a counseling agreement or a PIP or anything like that. And we continue to talk about what is that difference between CME and when we've got performance improvement, because we do anticipate the idea of, if things are looking like they're not going the direction, is to have those conversations and not necessarily use CME as the, oh, you just did something yesterday, Jessica, you and I are going to have a CME conversation. That was the distinction we were trying to separate from CME and performance improvement.
So there's a word I like to use that's certainly wasn't one that I maybe knew in my past, but it's the idea of coherence in communications or in conversations. And when I say coherence, I mean in terms of being in a balanced, regulated, calm and coherent state. So you're in balanced nervous system state. You're not reacting. You're not angry. You're not shut down. You're in that balanced state. And you're also linked up. All your intelligences are linked up. They're online. You're connected to your heart space, your gut, your brain. You're operating from a place of compassion, creativity, and courage. And I think that what I hear you saying is you want those CME conversations to be coherent. They're not
Absolutely.
reactive. They're not combative. They are safe, calm, conscious conversations.
Yes.
And I think what is necessary to that is, and what's really, I think, part of what I've been hearing you say is, and I like to use the term horizontal versus vertical relationship, that these conversations are horizontal, not vertical.
Mm-hmm.
There's not one person who owns it over the other one, but both are partnered together in ensuring that it's a meaningful, effective, and growth producing conversation. And I think a lot of times we've lived so long in vertical relationships, that's confusing, that's uncomfortable, it's new, it's different. And so it takes time for people to realize that it's safe to be in that type of relationship and conversation. And really what I mean by that is, a vertical relationship is that someone has more power, control, authority, influence over the other, versus a horizontal where it's viewed as both are influencing one another, both are coming together, and it's a two-way conversation. And those are so much more impactful. Those are so much more meaningful, and they actually get to the root issues a whole lot faster than when you're dealing with a lot of ego fluff and confusion about who's in the driver's seat.
Yeah, it was a big understanding for people to get when we said, your CME conversations, go out there and book them. The team member can schedule them. The manager can schedule them. It can go either way. And we're not going to tell you what has to happen. So we ran into that where they were like, well, my manager never set up my CME conversation. Let's talk through this, because you can set it up as well. So it leveled that accountability too within that. And then the system that we utilize now has this opportunity to share it before. So we want people to go in there and capture any information that they want to talk through and acknowledge within the questions of CME or within the assessment in CAT, and then share it with the other person. And we're not guiding whether that has to be done by the team member first or the manager first. We just want you sharing it before you sit down and have the conversation, and then have the conversation, add anything you need to, and then sign off on it. But both people then have to sign off on it. So it is designed to very much be that horizontal space that you're talking about as opposed to vertical.
Yeah. I think what can be hard there is that leaders get trained, but individuals often don't. And so the degree to which that individual people have been trained on the skill set of how to stay regulated in a critical conversation, of how to notice if their body's shifting into different states, of how to attune to the person that they're communicating with. And so if they're not equally equipped, then it creates a disharmony, right? Like it creates that disconnect. And so while I know it's a much bigger investment for organizations to invest in training everybody to have those skill sets, the payoff is huge, right? If everybody can understand how to do that really effectively, it's really a critical component, I think.
One of the things, we did this at the Federal Reserve and we do this at HHHunt as well, of when we look at development, like looking across the board and what are the things, of course, we spend a lot of time from that leadership, like you said, that leadership development on all the different things. What are we doing for team members, and what are those things that cross over that we expect and involve everybody on? And is everybody getting the same foundational level of training and understanding and education around these things? And then our business partners are really close with the leadership in their business units that they help support. And as we come up to CMEs and as we come up to the CAT timeframes, is what do you need from us? You've got meetings that's got your whole teams. What can we do to help to create that understanding, create that expectation for anyone in these conversations so that they can come to what feels like on the same level and have those coherent, I'm going to be using that term now, those coherent type of conversations in either one of these.
Yeah. Well, and I think I've just recently put together what I'm calling my C3 conversations, which are conscious, coherent, and connected. And those are very distinct skill sets that it's really easy to overlook in how we approach a conversation and how we do so with intention and purpose and create a better result because of it. I do want to go back to and shift to the CAT assessment a little bit too, because I think, and I for sure do not have this space necessarily figured out in my mind, but when it comes to compensation as well as assessing performance, it is a very split field on the appropriate or best way to do it. Even when we try to identify, so we'll start with performance, even when we try to say what is exceptional performance or the best performance, what's not, how are you measuring against that? There's so much subjectivity involved that it's very difficult. And for years, I remember organizations that I've talked with other leaders who've created competency models and detailed descriptions, and we've spent hours upon hours trying to define and create what does it look like at each of these levels, when in reality, the thing we care most about is not necessarily how someone measures up against an arbitrary, some scale we've created, but really how are they doing against what they're trying to get accomplished in a given year, right? Like, how are you doing against the expectations that were set? Are you meeting them, exceeding them? And so I think what can be really interesting about how you guys do yours around job responsibilities, I want you to talk a little bit about that, is that it's really focused on what people are doing and how they're doing at the things that they're accomplishing, rather than on a scale of 1 to 5, how collaborative are you working with other team members to get the project that you're working on done? They're slightly different, but they really create a different feel when you're having the conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk a lot about it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And So that everything that you just said was really the crust of the conversation when we sat down with the senior leadership group and said, okay, the first iteration of this really didn't feel good. Felt a little bit too traditional objectives and how do we not quite the angle that we wanted to go at. And so what we focused on was a little bit like what you just said is, okay, how do we speak about what the job expectations are, the job responsibilities are, and help craft questions. Now we have one overall question, but what we did to help support each of those is here's some of the discussion questions that you can talk through. What are some of the projects? What are some of the details and actions? And we liked the word contributions because it felt very like their own personal piece
I
of
like
the
that.
success. And let's talk about what those things are that align with what we have said in the job description and job responsibilities that we're both in alignment with understanding. So that's really that first question. And again, the reason why we were trying to stay away from a number is the words felt more personal and less of fitting into like what you said, that arbitrary box of something. We could explain the words a little bit better to help guide how a team member looks at themselves and the manager. The second question, so the first and second question are a little bit tied to each other because that second question ties back to our values of being a lifelong learner. And what are you doing over the last 6 months that helps contribute to staying in that competence space to do your job well? Not necessarily to go above and beyond, but to do what we're asking you to do. How are you staying up to date and committed to being talented in your role? That was to address the what you do. The how we realized that building relationships to create sort of good experiences with each other was what we have always said separates us. And so, and again, under the building relationships question, and then one around communicating with intent and impact, we really tried to help facilitate the conversation by just giving them more questions to talk through between the team member and the manager. We did do the traditional of these assessment categories. Here's a deeper dive into what that means and how we view that. We tried to use words that were representative of what we wanted the conversation to be about, but also took into account that personal feeling of how I either view myself or how somebody else views me and my work and how I come across. So the scale goes from unreliable is the lowest, inconsistent, developing, aligned, noteworthy, and inspirational. And again, you probably wouldn't get anybody in our world to sit there and say, we think this is absolutely perfect
Yeah.
and everything. And we understand that we're going to continually learn from this process and doing it a little bit differently. We hope that it does give a different feel to that kind of conversation. Right now, we've got 2 thumbs up from a lot of the feedback that we've heard from these conversations. And the fact that this, coupled with the See Me, has enabled them to have just richer, deeper connections with their team members while still trying to figure out how are they doing and what adjustments and everything we need to make, or keep emphasizing all the good stuff so that we keep with the success that we've had with them.
Well, and I think so something interesting around like scales, and I agree, I've been through many myself, is, and I think this is something that gets convoluted in some of these conversations, is that there is a difference between where are you in terms of your skill and capability development. And I always like to start with, I am still at understanding. So I just learning, right? Like nobody, I always use the analogy of like, nobody tells a baby that's learning to walk that you are underperforming, right? Like, or that you are ineffective or, something like, because you're still learning. So it's not negative. You're just still on the journey, right? And so if you start with skill and capability, understanding, and the way that I move through it is I move from understanding to integrating. So now I understand it. I'm integrating it into the way that I think, feel, and behave. to developing it. I'm honing it. I'm increasing my competency of it by practicing it, doing it, to eventually evolving it, which is where we really find where there's hurdles or blocks or things that are keeping us from getting to the next level, until eventually where we've achieved mastery. We're at mastery. We can teach other people. We can partner around it. We're an expert at it. And we can take that journey when it comes to things like skill development and capability development. And it's a one-way journey. You don't go backwards, right? Like if you've developed strong presentation skills, you have strong presentation skills. There's only one direction that you're going with it. But then there are other sets of capacity-based skills or capacity-based intelligence that I think, and consciousness or self-awareness elements that I think aren't as linear. And that's where we try to apply a capability model to something that isn't that, right? So suddenly somebody who's always performed well, they've met their commitments, they've been on time with their projects. Now suddenly they're not. They're missing their projects. They're mismanaging what they're getting accomplished. They're missing their deadlines. And then we go, oh, they have bad planning and organizing. Well, do they? Do they because they've exhibited it before? Or is there something else going on? They don't have a commitment to the project, or they have a lack of capacity to deliver on the things that you're asking them to deliver. And in my experience, and what I'm starting to see is that it's really important to differentiate between capability and capacity, because I can be capable and then be dropping the ball because I don't have capacity, because I'm overwhelmed emotionally, I'm exhausted, I'm in a survival state, I'm whatever. It's causing performance issues, and they're not to be ignored. But let's deal with the capacity challenge, not make it a capability issue. I don't know if that resonates.
It does, in the sense of, like, when a lot of times, I think I've said this, like when left to our own accord, we're going to make up the story that seems most plausible to ourselves, which could be different among different people. It's the whole, in my head, if A plus B equals C, then it's got to be C. And so even when we talk about that feedback model, is talk about what your assumptions are when you see this kind of behavior, that it's not a capability, it's a capacity thing. Or what else is it? What else could it be, instead of thinking or needing for you to figure it out on your own, write the story, and then use that with that individual going forward, which may not be the most positive thing. Talk about what those assumptions are, or open up the conversation of, let's talk about this. Like, I'm assuming it could be a capacity thing. Is that what we need to talk about? Is that really what's driving it? Is there something else? And if it is, let's talk about that. I think some of it is too of a lot of leaders needing to feel like they need to have all the answers, and they need to be able to manage people just as well as they manage tasks in projects. And we are so much more complicated.
I like to say we absolutely need to manage projects, tasks, activities, systems, programs, processes. Those things have to be managed. They are discrete. They are machines. Machines can be managed. Human beings are not machines.
Right.
I actually don't believe that human beings can be managed. I get that we use the term performance management. Yeah. Human beings can only be partnered with. That is the only thing that we can do, is co-create together to look at how we accomplish things. Because the more that we direct and the more that we try to manage, the more resistant the human body is. And so when it comes to capacity, and I actually like to use managers and leaders the most, because there are many leaders who we ask them to do things and they have never developed the capacity to do them. And so certainly emotional intelligence is an example of that. So if I'm asking you to identify and have empathy with or compassion for your team members, and you have never developed the capacity of emotional intelligence, you've never really even connected with some of your own emotions, let alone that of others,
right?
Then the capacity isn't there to give them the steps of how to do it, and they're still not going to be able to do it. In fact, in my experience, sometimes it's even worse, because they follow some steps, but it doesn't land, doesn't feel authentic, it doesn't feel real. Because it's not, because they don't actually have the capacity to do it. And so when it comes to some of these leadership skills, And that's why I separate the two. I can be capable of having this conversation and not have the capacity to do it well, right?
Yep.
Not have the intuitive sense or even the cognitive ability, right? There are times where we're exhausted and we've just been through a huge project or something significant, and our brain doesn't have capacity to engage at that level again until it has a chance to recuperate.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really important component to recognize, even in the leaders that we're asking to engage in these ways. And that's not a deficit, right? So when I say you don't have the capacity, that doesn't mean you've done something wrong, you're bad, you're not good enough, you're not competent enough. No, that's like saying, that because somebody has to wear glasses that they can't see well enough, right? Like a capacity is an element of our current state and what's happening and what we can and can't do in that moment. And if your car runs out of gas, it's out of gas.
Yeah.
Like, you have to fill it back up. You can't just keep pushing it harder to make it go farther.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up the emotional intelligence, because that seems to be the capsule that kind of, shows up the most often when I'm talking with leaders, new leaders, all of that, because there is an expectation that I know, not just HR, but just in general, that as soon as you get into that people management space, it's like, okay, this is supposed to click on, when we may not have really spent a whole lot of time preparing people to get in that space or expecting it in an individual contributor kind of role. There's a lot of times where the coaching conversations or just general conversations with leaders are about, well, Keri, I don't want to have to talk about my emotions, let alone anybody else's emotions. And then it's the conversations and like, okay, then let's talk about that. What is it about that? And peeling that onion a little bit about what is keeping them from going into that space. And sometimes it's fascinating, because it's like, you're showing me emotion in telling me that you don't want to get into an emotional space. So we dig into that a little bit. And even with the colors that from the insights assessment that we do, they're like, nope, I lead with these two colors. This is me not dealing with my feelings. I like to go like, tell me the details, tell me what we need to get accomplished, and let's go and do it. This people stuff underneath here gets a little squishy. And so I'm like, okay, let's talk about this though.
Well, and I love assessments because they help us to understand ourselves. And also, there's a problem with assessments, which is that they're very conceptual. Assessments are what we think about ourselves or know about ourselves. They're a characterization of our personality or the personality that we've developed as a result of our lived experience. But actually, in many cases, that personality is changeable. That personality is rewirable. And it's just the result of the experiences that we've had.
Yep.
And the truth is that personality sits on top of our bodies. And our bodies have neural networks in them, in our heart, in our gut, in our brains, and they run together. And whether we've activated them or not, they're there. They're running. And so to your point, I may not be very connected with my heart space and how to really connect with it in a way and have the capacity to use it in a way that's really positive. But that doesn't stop the anger from exploding in the moment. That doesn't stop my frustration with the employee who isn't getting the work that I assigned them done when I told them I wanted it done. So the emotion is going to be there. You don't turn it off. And even though you don't like it and you want to avoid it or you want to not deal with it, in a lot of ways, it makes it worse.
Yeah. I have said to them probably 100 times, one of our leadership groups is, we are feeling beings first, then we're logical. So you will have that emotion, you will have that feeling, you'll have something that your body is going to react to, your heart's going to react to it. And then you're going to try and, for some, want to flip that into a very logical space. So that is one of the reasons why I like the insights assessment, is that is the basis of what they talk about, is you have all four of these. So and then they expand it into 8 blended, because it all starts blending together. I say it's our crayon box that melted in the car in the back seat. And because at the end of the day, you get to choose how you want to show up, circumstances, learning, all of this stuff evolves that personality, those preferences and things like that. And you get to choose. You get to make a conscious choice a lot of times how that shows up. And so that can fluctuate all over the place. And there's good versions of that, and there's bad versions of that. And what we're trying to really do with that assessment is be conscious of it. We're not putting you in a box with it. We also don't want you to use it as an excuse, because if you've got all four of these color energies, you've got a multitude of things to pull from. You just have preferences and where you naturally want to go. Being mindful of what you need and what other people need could be two different things. And giving a little bit of what they need versus what you need is designed to build that relationship. A lot of times I ask people, either it's a feedback conversation or a difficult conversation, is how important is this relationship to you? Because that's an outcome of these conversations. And what I've said is most of your working relationships are important enough for you to really pay attention to that emotional intelligence. Where are you at when you're coming into these conversations yourself, let alone where somebody else might be coming into? I tell them all the time, it's like it's two sides of a coin. There's very much we can create processes, checklists, and things like that for you to get through conversations, to lead correctly. And then there's a people aspect to all of this, because you're not dealing with a machine. And those two things have to be thought about and considered and built upon, just like money, like a coin. Like it's got to have those two sides. Otherwise, it's not really worth anything. The value comes between pulling those two things together and being very mindful of both of those when having any conversations or how you approach your leadership style in any of those kind of scenarios.
I love it. I think that we could go probably all
know.
day. And so I am going to bring this to a close and give you a second to maybe give any final thoughts that you have for our listeners. But I think what's important to note about all of this, and I think something you just said that's really important, is that human beings are very uniquely wired individuals. And as soon as we start to try to say everybody's going to be a certain way, or that if you compare to this scale, it looks like this, we start to get into really difficult conversations. And if instead we can look at each human being as that unique being, and how do we help one another keep progressing on that journey, keep moving towards ever more advanced states of evolution, growth, performance, results, and to do it in a way that creates less friction between us. That's the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is not to create a hierarchy of ratings, but actually to create results and to create impact and create business outcomes. And the more that we can bring the humanness back into that, more impactful the result's going to be.
Yeah.
So tell me, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners? Any final insights you want to share before we wrap this up?
I love the fact, and I love being part of a culture that is really about the people and what experiences do we have with each other when working together? What do we give our customers and everybody else that we interact with to do our jobs? And at the end of the day, we are successful as a company because we are a for-profit. We've got goals, objectives, and things like that. And we use people to make that success. And so if we invest in their success, that should correlate to our success. And I used a partial of a quote a couple months ago that we're just not betting on strategies, we're betting on people. So let's set ourselves up for success by focusing on our people. And again, letting them have success, because in turn, that brings us success.
I absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much, Keri, for
You are
coming
so welcome.
on. To all of our listeners, I just want to conclude with that there are so many different choices we have when it comes to how to address performance and how to look at doing these practices in our workplaces. And we're in such an interesting space in terms of time and culture and environment. And we have an opportunity to create really conscious, coherent, and connected conversations that truly create change and that truly create results as organizations. And so I hope that some of what we talked about today and in these conversations around these different tools will spark some insight or some interest in pursuing maybe something different you haven't considered before. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful week. As always, I just want to remind you to always keep evolving, keep growing, keep rewiring those neural pathways so you can live your best life, an exceptional life. We'll be back again next week with another episode.